Hey folks, we are going to cover today kind of moving into colonial slavery. We talked a lot the other day about transitioning away from indentured servitude into colonial slavery, and we kind of looked at the laws that got put into place after Bacon's Rebellion. And so we're gonna get into kind of on the ground what slavery looks like, in addition to those laws, just sort of the reality of things. Now, this is also an essay question. Fully discuss the various occupations of enslaved people as well as disadvantages and examples of agency in each one. Now, this isn't all inclusive. We could come up with, 50 at least other occupations that enslaved people did, but these are kind of the big ones, the ones that you're going to see the vast majority of enslaved people taking part in. Now, slavery as a whole is absolutely terrible, but each individual occupation, there's usually something about this individual's position that is more disadvantageous than other enslaved positions. So we're going to run through those and look at what makes this one, have a disadvantage compared to other enslaved occupations. Also, there are some examples, and I'm going to cuss a little bit here, but there are some things about certain enslaved positions that enslaved people can use to have a tiny, tiny amount of control over their lives. Not a whole lot, just a tiny bit. And so, kind of a good way to think of this is these examples of agency are some little thing that might make this person's life slightly less shitty. Okay. So it's some little thing that is gonna help in a tiny, tiny way. And that'll make more sense as we run through these. Sorry. So I don't really have numbers on these. I will sometimes just sort of ballpark a number, but these are just guesstimates that I'm pulling out of the air. So don't feel like oh well, Dr. Gaines said this many enslaved people were this category. No, this is just a guess. So as far as the house slaves, these are enslaved people that worked in the main house, the enslaver's house, the owner's house. Um, these folks will typically live in the kitchen. Like they will work in the kitchen, they will sleep in the kitchen. Um, and they're responsible for, so for this one, I need you to tell me on the essay what exactly this person did. What was their duties that they were responsible for? So they were responsible for cleaning the household for the most part. There might have been other enslaved people that will help with that depending on the size of the household. But this person is responsible for cleaning the household. They are responsible for making as well as repairing clothing. Sometimes some depends on your kind of level of wealth for the enslaver if they're going to have these people make clothing or they're going to order specific clothing from a tailor or something like that. Uh, they're responsible for cooking the meals for the enslavers' households. The enslaved people that live in the slave cabins, they're on their own for what they're going to cook. They will be provided food, but they'll prepare that food does not come out of this kitchen for the most part. And they're also responsible, really get this in your head. For taking care of all of the children on the plantation. So any new kids that are born, this person is going to definitely take care of them, both white and black. Um, Now, when the enslaved kids turn about 7 years old, sometimes a little bit earlier than that, but about, 6, 7 years old, this person, the house slave, will no longer care for those enslaved children. Those enslaved children, at 6, 7 years old, will start working out in the fields. Um, Now, we're going to have some bleed over because I'm going to talk about field slaves here in a second. Those kids are not going to be responsible for producing the same amount of work that an adult would be, responsible for. This is just basically on the job training kind of a thing. This is what your life is going to be like forever. Is the notion there. Now, the white kids from the enslaver's household, this person will take care of them, much much later, probably looking after them at least, until they're probably 12, 13, something like that. Those kids will maybe go to a tutor, maybe not, depending on the wealth of the household. But so that's kind of the situation there. Um, the little bit of agency that the house slaves have are two big ones. This person is preparing the food for the enslaver's household. And since they're preparing food for the enslaver's household, they have access to better quality food than the rest of the enslaved population on this plantation gets. So they have the ability to sneak some, not a lot, because you get caught, that's a beating, but they have the ability to sneak some food either for themselves or for loved ones or, other enslaved people. They can sneak a little bit of food on a somewhat regular basis. Um, they also, um, and then this is a really good one because it gets at what the enslavers thought of enslaved people. The enslavers a lot of time thought of enslaved people as not being very intelligent, not being very swift. And so they would talk openly around the household, and not even think of this person as, a person, or at least not a very intelligent person. And so they would, in conversations around the household, they might say, hey, there are slave buyers coming, or, I'm thinking of buying a couple of more people, and, Fred on the next plantation over, he's looking to sell a couple of people, stuff like that. And so this person has access to information. And, kind of military circles, they would call this actionable intelligence. This person has access to information. And because the enslavers typically don't think of the, African American enslaved people as being very intelligent, they don't really think not to talk about stuff like this in front of them. Well, this person can then go out to the slave quarters and say, hey, there is a slave buyer coming, and they're supposed to be here next week. And there are accounts of people that will take enslaved people that will take their children and take off and hide in the woods. They might be in the deep south and unable to make it all the way into the northern states for freedom, but they can go and hide out in the woods and take their kids with them to prevent their family from being broken up. And so there are some interesting accounts of that happening. Josh Rothman, I think, is his last name, wrote a really good book called The Ledger and the Chain, and it's about slave purchases and the movement of the internal slave trade from the upper South to the lower South. And as these slave buyers would come through, people would try to keep their families together by fleeing and taking off into the woods a little bit. So this person also, though, like let's say we said Fred has the plantation next door. Well, a lot of times enslaved people would, and it's not legally binding, but they would marry people on neighboring plantations and have relations and possibly even have kids with them. Well, if Fred at the next plantation is possibly looking to sell a couple of people, well, one of the people that's out in the slave quarters might be married to one of the people on Fred's plantation, and they might be able to go to the owner of this plantation and like, hey, if you're thinking about buying somebody, Jim, Jim over there is a solid worker, and trying to get Jim onto this plantation. Um, so, this sort of information can be very, very useful. And so that's a tiny bit of agency. So a little bit better food sometimes, and information, actionable intelligence that these people might be able to get a hold of. Disadvantages. Disadvantages on this particular person are pretty rough. They are in the household of the enslaver. And if the enslaver or anybody that lives in the enslaver's household, white people, has a bad day, this person is readily available as a punching bag. If you are really, really just pissed off, this person is right there for you to, be able to unfortunately take that aggression out on. And this person is enslaved, their property. They don't have the ability to really do anything about it. So, so physical violence can be unleashed on these folks pretty regularly. On top of that, this person's in the house 24/7. They're available. And so if the male enslaver or his sons or any other white males that are living in the household is feeling sexually aggressive, this person is there and can be easily raped. Um, this person is literal property and they don't have a voice to, really, really fight back against this or make any kind of, hey, this person raped me. Well, you're property. Um, and so there is a high likelihood of sexual assault, rape against the house enslaved people. On top of that, to make that even worse, is that a lot of male enslavers will then claim, to their wives if they are caught, well, that woman is a Jezebel. That's a term that gets used a lot at the time. That woman's a Jezebel. She seduced me. I can't be responsible. I can't control my actions around women. Uh, and so it's not my fault that I did anything. It's her fault. She seduced me. And so a lot of women of the household, the wives of the enslaver, can't do anything to their husbands. This is a very patriarchal society, a very husband male led society. And so she can't just go and be like, well, I'm going to divorce you. What are you going to do? Uh, she doesn't have that really ability. The person that she can take out her frustration and anger and feelings of betrayal on is that person. And so a lot of times after, sexual abuse, rape happens, the wife of the enslaver will also go after this person for, hey, how dare you seduce my husband? That's just absolutely terrible. We don't tolerate such kind of things. Another excellent, holy cow, fantastic book is Harriet Jacobs, Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl. Harriet Jacobs was enslaved, and her owner tried to sexually assault her. She was really, really lucky and was able to sort of dodge his efforts pretty much every time. And then she was, it's been a long time since I read this. She was able to hide out in like an attic or something that was still on the plantation. I think it was in one of the slave quarters, maybe. She was able to hide out in this attic for several years, and then she escaped to permanent freedom, and then later wrote her own memoirs. But Incidents in the Life of a Slave Girl talks about this. Um, Her owner was trying to rape her, and then he kept on saying, well, Harriet just keeps seducing me, Harriet keeps flirting with me and stuff like that. And so the owner's wife would be extra mean to Harriet, make her give her like extra duties and stuff like that. So um little example, I like a lot of local history, kind of local. The Belle Meade plantation up in Nashville, in 1860-ish. 1860-ish, there were 136 enslaved people on that plantation. 10% of them were biracial. And so there's a lot of sexual assault, rape going on in you know, the antebellum South, uh, that these people don't have the ability to dodge for the most part. Harriet Jacobs was really lucky. But so on this one, just to kind of recap, we went through the house slaves kind of occupation, the things that they are responsible for doing every day: cooking, cleaning, taking care of all of the children on the plantation, making and repairing clothes. And then we went through bits of agency, sneaking better food, and actionable intelligence information. And then we went through disadvantages: physical abuse, sexual abuse. Cool. All right. And I need you to do that for all four of these. So we did it for house slaves. We need to run through all four of these. If you see this on the test and you want to address this one, don't just stop at house slaves. I need you to do all four. So, so our second group, and this is not even probably about it. This is the majority of enslaved people in the South are going to be working as field slaves. If I had to pull numbers out of the air, I would say probably maybe 3% of enslaved people worked as house slaves, and that might be high. And at the very, very least, 95% of enslaved people will work as field slaves. Um, that's probably pretty close to accurate. Don't worry about numbers. I'm just kind of throwing some stuff out there. These people are going to do what you think that they do. They are responsible for planting the crops. They are responsible for tending the crops as the crops grow to maturity, trying to, as much as you can, keep bugs away from them. Uh, Maybe putting scarecrows out and stuff like that. If it's a food crop, scarecrows don't eat cotton, but if it's a food crop, trying to keep the animals away from the crops. And then at the end of the season, these people will be responsible for harvesting and then processing the crop. This is Processing is especially important in cotton production as well as tobacco. Um, Cotton production, before the cotton gin, enslaved people had to pick out the seeds from every boll of cotton. And for tobacco, you've got to hang the leaves up at a tobacco drying barn. And um, takes a lot of effort, especially on the cotton side of things. Takes a tremendous amount of effort. So, and uh, let's see, we did advantages. Um, Advantages here are that there is a lack of supervision. On the Decatur Calhoun campus, um, that was, prior to the Civil War, a 3,000 acre plantation. The Luke Matthews plantation, a little bit up the road there by Bucky's, was at least a couple of thousand acres. I'm not sure exactly how many acres Luke Matthews had, but that's a lot of territory to be mindful of. And you've got enslaved people that are working around all of this territory. Now, the enslavers will either supervise themselves or sometimes they'll hire overseers, um, but that's still a lot of territory. And so that amount of land to try to keep an eye on, and all of the enslaved people that are working around that area, it offers a little bit better chance of escape. So, like the folks that are working in the house slaves, they're underfoot all the time. The enslavers are constantly somebody's around the house, and so it's unlikely that they will be able to escape. Harriet Jacobs again sort of disproves some of that. But on a very, very large plantation, you have a slightly better chance of escape. We'll talk about different ideas on what escape means in a second. Uh, as far as disadvantages on this, as far as disadvantages on this, you guys know Alabama gets hot in the summer. And when we're rolling into July and August, where you kind of need to be out there and tending to the crop and watching out for everything, it is incredibly, incredibly hot. And, you know, a lot of folks are going to get heat related illnesses, heat stroke, and stuff like that, heat exhaustion. So there's a risk of heat related illnesses on the disadvantaged side of this. Likewise, not so much for cotton crops, and I don't think so for tobacco, but I don't know. Uh, but especially for food crops, every plantation is going to have food crops. Their primary cash crops are cotton and tobacco, depending on where you are. But every plantation is also going to try to produce its own food. Well, food attracts, critters, bugs, and rodents and stuff like that. And rodents, especially, will attract snakes. And here in Alabama, we have several interesting nifty neato uh, species of venomous snakes. We've got rattlesnakes, we've got copperheads, we've got coppermouths or cottonmouths, sorry, and I'm sure that there's a couple of other venomous snakes around here. Don't kill them; they have their purpose and stuff. But if you're, trudging through these food crops and there are mice running around, there's going to attract snakes. And stepping on a snake like that, the snake might bite in self-defense or just bite out of being startled. And so risk of, being bitten by venomous snakes in especially the food crops area is going to be a disadvantage. So, now, the next two slides. So I've only got two slides left. There are, again, more occupations for enslaved people, but we're going to stick with the big four. These next two slides, though, be very deliberate on your description, on what these people are doing, but also be mindful that a lot of the advantages and disadvantages are mirrored on these last two groups. They have really the same advantages and disadvantages. Um, so, third group of enslaved people are skilled slaves. These are enslaved people that are doing jobs like being a blacksmith. They are making nails. They are, making horseshoes, stuff like that. Maybe making hinges for doors if you get really, really kind of specialized ish. Um, that's probably not. But blacksmiths, we also have carpenters. Everything is, at this time especially, almost everything is constructed out of wood and, furniture, buildings, all kinds of stuff. And so we have a lot of carpenter enslaved people as well. Um, the thing here is, so both of these jobs, blacksmith, making nails, horseshoes, hinges, stuff like that, carpentry, furniture, buildings and things. The thing here, though, is that a lot of times, you know, um, there's not enough work for that particular person to do on a particular plantation. And so if an enslaver owns a carpenter slave, they're not all the time possibly going to be building structures on the plantation. They're not all the time going to be building or repairing furniture. Same thing with blacksmiths. There's only so many horseshoes that you need to make. Now, Thomas Jefferson had a nail factory on his plantation. He actually made nails, and I believe that he sold them as, some income. But something that happens here is, like I said, there's not enough work to be done on any single plantation a lot of times for these people. And so, kind of in the advantage category, a lot of skilled slaves, carpenters, blacksmiths, will be rented out. They'll be rented out on the local economy to do work for other people. And, the picture there, that's the White House in Washington, D.C. When the United States Capitol was being constructed, we'll get there later on. They needed a lot of labor. They needed a lot of labor that was very, very handy around. And so they hired a lot of enslaved people to do that. So a whole lot of enslaved people built the White House, built the United States Capitol building. Um, Now, be really specific. To encourage these people to do a good job, a lot of times their enslaver would let them keep a tiny bit, a tiny amount of the income that they produced. I'm just pulling numbers out of the air right now, but let's say they were paid, and this is actually a lot of money, but let's say they were paid $1 for some kind of job that they were responsible for doing, then the enslaver might allow them to keep like a nickel. So out of every dollar, they might get to keep something like a nickel or something like that. Uh, and so the ability to actually get a little bit of a kickback is an advantage. It is something that gives this person a slight degree of agency over their life because they have a little bit of cash. Now, something you might think, and this is great because it's a disadvantage actually. Something that you might think is that, well, why don't these folks, if they're getting a little bit of money for every job that they do, why don't they just save up and then they can purchase their freedom? And that's an absolutely great idea. That's what I ask this in my face-to-face classes, and that's always the answer that I usually get. Well, since one, you have to have an owner that's willing to sell, and not all owners are interested in selling. Like somebody might come up to my house right now this afternoon and be like, "Hey, I will give you $20,000 for the car you've got outside." I like my car. It's actually worth a little more than that, maybe. I don't know. But I don't want to sell my car. Now, if they came and offered me like 100,000, oh yeah. But you have to have an owner that's willing to sell. On top of that, and here's the big kicker, and here's the disadvantage to being a skilled slave, a carpenter, a blacksmith, is this person has skills that other enslaved people do not, and that increases their value. And so while this person might think, hey, I'll save up and purchase my freedom, well, you're worth more than the average enslaved person. And so you're going to have more money than you would be for a field hand, something like that. So the advantage here is that they have skills, and these skills sometimes enable them to earn a little bit of money, but those same skills make their value increase to the point where self-purchase is unlikely. And so a lot of times, the things that this category of enslaved people will use that money for is buying better quality of clothing, buying better quality of food, something to make their life slightly more manageable, kind of a thing. So now, artisan slaves have the same advantages and disadvantages. They have skills that they can use, and sometimes these skills enable their owners to rent them out. And so people might be rented out, but their value is even higher than a carpenter or a blacksmith. These people have some really specific skills, and so a lot of times, they're worth so much that their enslavers aren't really interested in renting them out. So, but a couple of specific examples on artisan slaves, like what the heck are we talking about there, is up in a place called Buffalo Iron Works. And I believe this is I think it's in North Carolina, but it could be in Virginia. There's also an iron works here in Alabama that's around, I think, Birmingham. Uh, and that one also is operated by enslaved people. Well, Buffalo Iron Works is a forge. What they are doing is they are taking raw iron that has been mined out of the ground, and they're running it through a blast forge. A blast forge heats it up really super hot, gets it into a molten state, and then they're going to draw off a lot of the impurities, and then they'll pour the almost pure iron into molds. And so, holy cow, you have to really know what you're doing there. You have to know, one, how to get a fire up that hot without burning down everything around you. And then you have to be able to safely, not kill yourself, be able to look at the colors on the molten metal and draw off the non-iron metals and leave the iron ones, and then pour that off safely into these molds. Well, the owner of Buffalo Iron Works, and there's a really cool book on this called Bond of Iron if you're interested, but the owner of Buffalo Iron Works actually had a system set up, and thankfully his records were preserved. They didn't get thrown away or destroyed or something like that. But he had a system where his enslaved iron workers had a certain amount of work that they had to do every single week, month, whatever the heck. They had to produce so much purer iron out of these molds every week or month and stuff like that. Anything that they produced over that, though, he called it overwork. And he would actually pay them. I don't think he paid them market value for their labor, but he would pay them something for what he called overwork. And so they were able to work more than the quota, and then be able to earn some money for themselves. And they used that money to, again, buy better quality clothes, buy better quality food. Some of them used that money to actually improve the slave quarters, so they were a little bit nicer slave quarters. Sorry. Um, so the other one, group local especially, is that building. The building over there is just across the river from the Decatur campus. That is the old State Bank in Decatur. The cool thing about that is those columns, those stone columns out front there, were carved by enslaved people from a rock quarry a little bit up in Trinity. Trinity's a little bit to the north of Decatur. The stone quarry is still there, and the guy there had a plantation, and he also owned that stone quarry, and he had enslaved stonemasons that were out there, and did a lot of the stone carvings and stuff for the community of Decatur and around there. Um, I've not been able to find out exactly why, and it may not be recorded. I honestly doubt it's recorded, but the bank was dedicated, I think, sometime in like 1840-ish. It's there during the Civil War, and there are bullet uh, strikes. They're not holes really, but there are bullet impact marks on those columns, and I think on some of the brickwork from the Civil War. So I think that the bank was dedicated around 1840, and the enslaver of those stonemasons, again, don't know why, but during the dedication ceremony, he freed those two guys. I don't know if they were getting older, and he was just like, "Hey, you guys have kind of done everything I've asked you to do," sort of thing. I don't know if what his motivation was, but there are several newspaper reports about him doing that. I've been really interested in finding out why, but I've kind of not, run into dead ends a lot on that. So, couple of individuals, as far as really really talented enslaved people. The three people down there, the guy with the in the white hat with the super giant mustache, that is Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels from Lynchburg, Tennessee, that produces Jack Daniels whiskey. The African American guy sitting next to Jack Daniels is a guy named Nearest Green. Nearest Green was an enslaved man that taught Jack Daniels how to make whiskey. He taught him how to distill whiskey. And the distilling process is not super complicated, but if you don't know what you're doing, and this is why you really should not drink moonshine whiskey, uh, but if you don't know what you're doing, you can really hurt people. You have to do something called cutting off the heads and cutting off the tails of the distillation process, because the alcohol that comes off at the beginning of the distillation process is different than the body, the part that you can drink. And that's also different from the last bit of alcohol that comes off at the end of the process. Um, the heads, the stuff that comes off the front, and the tails, the stuff that comes off the back. That's the kind that when you hear about people drinking moonshine sometimes and they'll go blind or they'll die, it's because somebody doesn't know what they're doing. Um, and so, don't drink moonshine that you bought from, Norton down the road. That's kind of a bad idea. um, so you do have to know what you're doing to distill whiskey safely, and actually, to distill good whiskey, which apparently Nearest Green did because he taught Jack Daniels how to do that. The other lady that my head's in front of a little bit is Susanna McGavock Carter. Uh, Miss Carter was an enslaved woman on the Belle Meade plantation, and after emancipation, she was one of the very few people that stayed with the plantation. They had 136 people prior to emancipation. After emancipation, I think five people. Yeah, five former enslaved people still worked on the plantation in 1877. So the Sons of Confederate Veterans and other lost cause kind of groups like to claim that, oh, all of the enslaved people were happy, and the enslavers took care of all of their enslaved property and stuff like that. Well, they must not have taken that good care of them, because 131 people were like, I'm leaving. So that whole myth about the kindly slave owners is a bunch of bull crap. Um, but for whatever reason, Miss McGavick did choose to remain. Miss McGavick Carter, sorry, chose to remain on the Belmead plantation after emancipation. And one of the really cool things that she is known for later, she was an enslaved house slave, uh, is that she made wine, and she apparently made really, really good wine. Again, you can find how to make wine on the internet and stuff like that, but unless you know what you're doing, you're not really going to make good wine. And really, really cool for us. Belle Meade has her methodology of the way that she made wine, and they still produce her recipe of wine. But in 1871, uh, Susanna won Best Blackberry Wine at the Colored People's Fair up in Nashville, so she knew what she was doing. So, so that's all four of those. Okay. Um, if this essay appears on the test and you choose to write about it, you need to tell me about each individual one's, occupations, what they were doing, uh, and you need to tell me about, examples of agency and disadvantages of each one. The best way to do this is to kind of go in order. Don't go house slaves did this and uh, field slaves did this, and then this is the advantage and disadvantage of each one. Just kind of everything on house slaves, everything on field slaves, everything on skilled, and then everything on artisan. That's kind of the best organization that I've seen work through that. Sorry. Um, now this is not essay question anymore. This is multiple choice land again. Um, Enslaved people are not going to just take that stuff laying down. They are going to have various methods of resistance. And something that I addressed a second ago, kind of, when I was talking about field slaves, I didn't really get into this, but you might have noticed that I like the enslaved people that go to the woods and then come back. Like, that's weird, right? Well, we usually think of enslaved people that run away, that are running away to the north and they're running away to permanent freedom. You can only do that if you're really in the upper South states. Like there are some people in the lower South states that are managing to pull that off, but you can really only do that if you're in the upper South states. Think about this. Like if an enslaved person down here in Alabama tries to run away permanently, then they have to cross all of Tennessee. They have to get out of Alabama. They have to cross Tennessee and then cross Kentucky. And then you can get up into like Ohio. That's pretty difficult because in southern states, there are going to be slave patrols out and people are going to get rewards for returning enslaved people, but people also, you can capture an enslaved person and be like, oh, this is mine now. So it's really unlikely as far as long-term runaways from down here. So upper south is where you really hear about sort of permanent runaways. um, Now down here though, and sometimes up in the upper south, you have short-term runaways where like down here in northern Alabama, it's unlikely to be able to cross Tennessee, cross Kentucky. And so if an enslaved person is being really, really horribly mistreated more than normal, they might run away and hide out in the woods for a while. One of the other enslaved people on the plantation knows where they went and can communicate with them, sneaking out in the middle of the night and going leaving, notes, maybe if the person can read. But then that person on the plantation might say to the enslaver, "Hey, I know where Ethel went to, but she has these demands, these requests that we make some changes. Otherwise, she's not going to come back, and you're going to have to go look for her. And yes, the enslaver can go and look for her, but they might spend 2 to 3 weeks, trying to find this person. Or you can just not beat them as much, go a little bit lighter on the work duties, something like that, and this person might come back on their own, to with some negotiation like that. So another thing about resistance is breaking tools. If you've got a group of enslaved people that are clearing woods, they're building a fence, they are, sort of setting up a road or something like that, and some tools, a tool gets broken, then they can't continue the work until that tool is repaired or replaced. And so you can't do that a lot, because if you do that a lot, it's going to be pretty obvious, and that's a beating. But occasionally, that kind of is a form of resistance. Um, Work slowdowns. If you've watched any movies that depicts enslaved people working out in the fields, usually they're out there in the field singing gospel songs, right? They're singing really slow paced gospel songs. And most of the time, when we see that, and when people at the time saw that, most of the time we just kind of think, oh, well, they're out there working and they're doing something to occupy their mind. They're trying to sort of mentally escape from this kind of situation that they're in. For gospel songs, especially, they will be looking, towards permanent freedom in the afterlife, kind of a thing. And so we just sort of think that's what's going on. But, and that is what's going on. To a degree, that is legit what's going on. But if you look at the way that they're working and listen to the song, a lot of times the song is kind of setting the pace of the work. And the song is kind of going really slow, and everybody is kind of picking a cotton, picking a cotton, kind of thing like that. And it sets the pace of the work. And so people will use these songs to set the pace of the work, not depicting slavery, but a really, really fantastic example of this that I like to show in class is the movie Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? It's a Coen Brothers movie with George Clooney. I think it was made, my gosh, back in the early 90s. But and the one of the opening scenes of the movie, all of the guys in the scene are on a chain gang. They're on a prison chain gang, and they're singing a song called Poe Lazarus, and they're using sledgehammers to break rocks. And the song is is catching the beat of the sledgehammers, and so everybody is hitting all on the same strike, you know, and the song is setting the pace of the work. And so it's slowing down a little bit, and it allows sort of this, it's kind of weird. It's like an unspoken negotiation where the work is getting done, and the overseers and the correction officers in Oh Brother Where Art Thou, they know that that's what's going on, but the work's getting done, but the inmates are kind of setting the pace of the work a little bit. So kind of an interesting thing. So there's some methods of resistance. There's lots of others, but those are some that I kind of like to talk about. Um, One of the last things on this slide is not a form of resistance. It's just kind of, there's room on this slide, and it doesn't, I don't know, really lend itself to going for an entire slide by itself. But this idea to me really captures what slavery is all about. And the big thing that slavery is all about, no matter what anybody tries to argue, especially the lost cause people that like to argue that the enslavers took care of their enslaved people and stuff. Slavery is about profit. That's all it's about. It's about generating profit from these people. And if, an enslaver will call a doctor or something like that, yeah, they might actually care for this person as a human being. But if they actually really, really cared for this person as a human being, they would free them. But, an enslaver might call a doctor for an injured or a sick enslaved person. But the primary core reason they're doing that is I need to get this person healthy again. So one, they don't die and I have to financially replace them. And two, I need to get them healthy again so they can get back to work. That's the name of the game, is getting people back to work to doing their jobs so that they can make the enslaver money. Really great example. I'm going back to the Belle Meade plantation again. Belmead was a plantation that raised horses. They did a lot of other stuff, but their primary thing was raising horses. And so they had a lot of horses and they had a lot of enslaved people that took care of those horses. Well, one of the the horse tenders at one point was kicked in the ribs. One of the horses got spooked or whatever and kicked this enslaved dude in the ribs, and it broke a couple of ribs. They gave him 2 days off. Like, that's it. They let him chill for 2 days and then expected him to get back to work. And apparently it healed, but I can't imagine just getting kicked in the ribs and a couple of ribs broken and I'm back to work a couple of days later. That's some wildness. So it's about profits at the core. And really, really graphic and disturbing example of that is, even on the enslaved plantations, even the ones that things are going okay, the enslavers feel like they have to maintain discipline. And so that means if an enslaved person does something that is outside of bounds, if they do something that's against the rules, according to the weird ideology, is that person has to be punished, because otherwise the rest of the enslaved population will see that you can get away with stuff and will push the boundaries. Okay, and so public punishments are a pretty common thing. Well, what happens if the person's pregnant, though? Can you beat a pregnant person? Yeah, you can. What you do, though, and there are accounts of this. President James K. Polk, who had a house up in Columbia, Tennessee, had plantations down in Mississippi, and Polk had a bad reputation among even enslavers, that he's a lot more rough than most other people. But Polk actually has instructions in a letter that he wrote to an overseer, because this overseer was like, "Hey, I've got this pregnant enslaved woman and she's not working as hard, she's acting out. What do I need to do to her?" And Polk wrote that guy a letter back, and he said, "Hey, here's what you do. You ever dig a hole? Dig a hole in the yard about this big. Gather all of the enslaved people, and you have her dig this hole in the yard, and then you have her lay face down and put her stomach inside that hole. And that way, when you go to beat her, you're just beating this enslaved woman, and you're not going to accidentally beat the fetus. Because when the fetus is born, that kid is worth money. And so they don't want to injure this enslaved baby, you know. So that's absolutely horrible, but that gets at the whole core of this, that we are stripping away the humanity of this entire group of people for profit, you know. And so all of the excuses and all of the, hey, these people can't take care of themselves, and the paternalism and stuff that you sometimes hear about in accounts at this time, it's so that they can justify benefiting from these people's labor and benefiting from the human property themselves. So Last couple of things on the colonial slavery, actually in the 1800s. But since we're on the topic of slavery right here, I like to do just kind of get everything right here. And we'll definitely talk about slavery. Please don't think that, oh, I'm only going to talk about slavery in this one lecture. And then, no, we've got a lot of stuff coming. But I like to get kind of the whole mentality of it and to get it right here early on. So next two things are in the 1830s. The LaLaurie House, this happens around 1832. And the next things with J. Marion Sims, I think it happens in 1850-ish is when he is doing his stuff. The first stuff, anyway, that we're going to talk about. So anyway, down in New Orleans, that house still stands down in the French Quarter. You can visit it. Don't go and peek in the windows. It's a private residence. That's rude. But you can go to the house if you're meandering around the French Quarter. There's not, as far as I know, I looked. We went back in earlier this last year, and there's no signs marking the house, but you can find the house. The address is pretty easily discoverable on the internet and stuff. But this is the LaLaurie house. Even if you pull it up on Google Maps, you can find it, but you have to find the address and then go and navigate to it down there in the French Quarter. But anyway, in the early 1830s, Dr. Louis LaLaurie, medical Dr. Louis LaLaurie, and his wife Delphine, there's a picture of her, bought that house down in the French Quarter and moved down there. They also brought with them about a dozen enslaved people. Somewhere around a dozen enslaved people were moved into the house with them, and that is a big house. It's about 4 or 5 thousand square feet. There's 3 floors. It's massive. Um, and so they moved into the house, and if you've ever been down in the French Quarter is really, really tight. The houses are very, very close together. There's not really a yard. If you walk in front of this house, you're walking on the sidewalk next to the house. There's not a front yard. And the roads are really, really narrow down in the French Quarter. And so sometime 1831-ish, the lady that lived in one of the houses facing the LaLaurie house was looking outside of her window and looking across the street, and she could see inside the LaLaurie house. They're that close together, and especially it's hot down there, and so you open the windows and you keep the curtains drawn so that you get a breeze. And according to the neighbor, she saw a 9, 10, 11-year-old enslaved girl brushing Delphine's hair. And this little 9, 10, 11-year-old enslaved girl was brushing Delphine's hair. She hit a snag, pulled Delphine's hair. And Delphine flew into a rage. And she grabbed a riding crop. You know those, I'm trying to get into frame here. Those little short kind of horse whips, that are about 1.5 feet. You use them to beat the horse to make the horse go faster. I don't know if that works or not. But Delphine picked up a riding crop and was chasing this little 9, 10, 11-year-old little girl through the house. She was just going to light this kid up. She was going to beat the snot out of this kid for pulling her hair. And they ran around on the second floor. The neighbor lady saw them go up, emerge up onto the third floor. I don't know if she could see the stairs or not, but she saw them kind of running around on the third floor, and then they later emerged up onto the roof. And when they got to the roof, this 9, 10, 11-year-old little girl jumped. She jumped off the roof rather than being beaten by Delphine. And beatings are bad, but if we get into a weird headspace, enslaved people knew that beatings happen. They've experienced beatings before. They've seen beatings being administered. So this 9, 10, 11-year-old little girl, she most assuredly, even outside of this situation, if she was with other people, other enslavers, she would have seen somebody being beaten. And so she would have known what kind of to expect, sort of thing. And she probably would have been beaten herself, even though she's that young. So this is unusual for her, this little enslaved girl, to choose to jump off the roof and commit suicide rather than face a beating by this really, really angry lady. So something is off there. Well, the Lorries have the little girl buried. I think they just have her buried in the backyard, sort of quietly, and didn't really say anything about it. But the neighbor lady was like, wow, that's kind of wild, and reported it to the city authorities. And this is kind of an interesting thing. New Orleans at the time has a law that you cannot excessively punish enslaved people. Well, where the heck is that line at, man? What do you mean by excessively, and what exactly is excessive? So it's up for judgment call, definitely. But she alerts the authorities. The authorities come in to take a look at the, I guess, well-being of the enslaved people at the LaLaurie house, and it had to be bad enough that the New Orleans authorities confiscated all of the LaLaurie's enslaved people. So they took them away. You're just being too much. Um, so that's kind of cool that they have some sort of you know controls, regulations. Well, anyway, the Lorries, like I said, well, I didn't say, but they're hinted at. Maybe they're really, really wealthy, and so the city had planned to auction off all of the Lorries' enslaved people. They confiscated them. That was a punishment, and the city planned to auction them off. Well, the Lorries gave their friends money with the instructions, hey, I need you to go to this auction. I need you to buy several of my enslaved people back. And so that's what happened. The friends went and bought the enslaved people back from the city, and so the Lorries got their enslaved property back. Um, I don't know this, but I'm just guessing that this isn't huge down here. This is not a huge city just yet, comparative to today. And so I can't help but thinking the city administrators probably figured out at some point what happened, but buying back all of their enslaved people was a pretty big financial loss. And so maybe that sent a message to the Lorries, and they would no longer behave like that. I don't know, but I kind of think that might have been what happened. Anyway, so things are quiet on the outside of the house. We don't know what's going on the inside, but things are apparently quiet on the outside of the house until 1832. And in 1832, a fire breaks out at the LaLaurie house. And it turns out later on, the fire department arrives and they put out the fire. But it turns out later on that the cook set the fire because things are back to terrible in the LaLaurie house. And so the cook in the household set this fire in the kitchen in the hopes of alerting the outside world something's going on and we need people to come here and see what's happening. The remarkable thing is that the cook was chained to the stove. And so the cook literally knew that setting this fire would likely cost them their life. It didn't. They were able to get out, fortunately, but they were willing to make that sacrifice to alert the world, or alert New Orleans, at least the French Quarter, of what was going on in the household. So the fire department comes, and the fire department goes through the house. And whenever there's a structure fire, the fire department puts out the fire, but then they go through the structure very meticulously to try to make sure the fire's out. because they don't want a spark, some embers to be burning somewhere and the fire kick back on after they've left. And so they go through the whole house and they get up either into the attic or up on the third floor. And when they get up there to the attic or the third floor, they make a horrific discovery. Lewis. Lewis is a medical doctor. And it turns out that the LaLauries were conducting medical experimentation on their enslaved property. Um, they had multiple enslaved people chained to the walls up there, and they were doing some horrible, horrible medical experimentation on them. Just a couple of them. Um, you skin your hand, and your skin grows back on your hand. That's kind of cool and stuff. Well, what's the extreme of that? How far can you go with that? And so, allegedly, one of the people up in the attic had the skin on their hand peeled off and their skin on their cheek peeled off, and the LaLauries had tied this person's hand to their cheek to see if that would grow together. Uh, Another person up in the attic, your long bones, if you break a bone, it will knit back together. Well, what happens if you take, your long bone and you break it, but then you set it at a weird angle? Like, does your body have the ability to knit itself, those bones together that far? And so they had somebody up there that they had broken the long bones and were trying to set them back at odd angles just to see if that would work. So, anyway, the fire department's absolutely horrified. They come outside and they tell the gathering crowd what has happened. And according to several newspaper accounts, the LaLauries were simply told to leave New Orleans and never come back. That's it. They were conducting medical experimentation on human beings. They were enslaved, but they were conducting medical experimentation on human beings, and they were simply told to leave the city and never come back. And that really gets at how far you can go with your enslaved property. What can you actually do? You can literally conduct medical experimentation that results in some people's deaths and still not really. I mean, they had to abandon their house, so they took a financial hit, but that's it, you know. So the LaLauries are a really great example of how far people can go. Sorry. Um, Now here in Alabama, that statue that statue is on the Alabama State Capitol lawn. If you go down to Montgomery and you go to the Capitol building, that statue is out there on the lawn today. That statue is a statue of Dr. J. Marion Sims. Uh, Now, Dr. J. Marion Sims is often regarded as the father of gynecology. Uh, the reason that Dr. Sims is regarded as the father of gynecology is this. We have all seen television shows and movies where there's a woman that is pregnant and she is in the middle of labor and the baby is not moving, right? We've seen that. And somebody in the group of people that is looking after this woman that is in labor yells out, "We've got to get that baby out of there." And the first thought that everyone has that is in the situation, that is also watching the situation on television, is that you've got to get the baby out of the birth canal because you could be cutting off circulation through the umbilical cord. The baby could be in distress, and so you've got to get them through the process of being born so that something really, really bad doesn't happen to the baby. Well, also, and I'm not going to describe this in too great of detail, when the baby is going through the birth canal, everything is really, really compressed. And so when the baby is stuck like that, it is cutting off circulation also to tissues in the mother's body. And if you cut off circulation to those tissues for too long, those tissues will die. And when those tissues die, that will sometimes create something called an obstetric fistula. You do not have to get that down for the test. But what happens is that the tissue in the birth canal is going to get compressed and it'll kill that tissue. And so sometimes you'll have just, fecal matter that will come out through the birth canal later on, because you've sort of ruptured those kind of plumbing. And so you have a lot of problems with incontinence, which can lead to a lot of infection, which can lead to some really, really bad stuff. And also, it's a terrible state to live like that. And so, Dr. Sims was down in Montgomery. He was operating down there in Montgomery, practicing, and three enslaved women on area plantations had these obstetric fistulas. Anarcha, Lucy, and Betsy. And this was such a problem for these women and, for the owners of the enslavers of these women, that the owners of these three different women that had this problem gave them to Dr. Sims. I don't know if they temporarily gave them to Dr. Sims or they just permanently, hey, see if you can fix this, and maybe you can fix this on other people. It's I'm not sure exactly on that and whatever, but whatever the case, their enslavers turned these three women over to Dr. Sims to fix this issue. And Dr. Sims is going to operate on these women. Well, they're African American women, and at the time, and to a degree today, unfortunately, we have this stupid idea that African American women, in particular, feel pain to a lesser extent than white people do. And that is literally a problem today. It's definitely a problem at this time, because Dr. Sims is going to operate on all three of these women without anesthesia. They are going to be operated on fully conscious, fully experiencing what is going on. And he operates on Anarcha like 30 times. 30 with no anesthesia. He is ultimately going to develop a method of fixing these obstetric fistulas, and that's why he gets the name of the father of gynecology. But he did this without these women's consent. These women do not have a choice. Their enslavers had a choice. They did not have a choice. They might have elected to fix this. And a lot of women, white women later, that go to Sims do elect to get this fixed. He uses anesthesia on them and they have a choice on the matter. So, anyway, um, something cool also with Sims is the way that we look at history. And I really love, and a lot of people get upset, not a lot of people, but some people get upset that we're looking at the complete, sort of picture of history. But I really feel that we should, and a lot of other historians really feels that we should as well. But this particular painting was done in 1952. And this painting is part of a series of paintings called Great Moments in Medicine. And it's depicting J. Marion Sims there in the black coat standing in front of Anarcha, and there are two medical assistants, medical students, ready to assist with whatever they're going to do with this woman that is on this examination table. And then there is a depiction of Lucy and Betsy cowering, hiding, peeking out from behind the curtain. But this image in 1952 is like, hey, this is one, and the treatment for this is wonderful. Don't get me wrong, but the way in which it was obtained is horrific. Uh, but 1952, great moments in medical history, and we're not thinking about these three women, what they went through, and their lack of consent and lack of anesthesia to obtain these sort of breakthroughs. Um, but 1952, we're like, hey, this is a cool thing, you know. So, really cool answer to that image. Uh, in night or sorry, 2022. 2022, recently we have started being more inclusive and more digging down into the reality of these kind of historical stories. And this particular painting was painted in 2022 by Michelle Broder, and that's the artist in front of the painting there, Michelle Broder, and it's called The Mothers of Gynecology. And it's really really cool. You've got Anarcha looking pretty tough, and then you've got Lucy and Betsy also standing there, and they're examining J. Marion Sims on this examination table. And you've got those two medical assistants, medical students cowering behind the curtain there, and they're in dresses, and so we've stripped away their masculinity to a large degree. But I really like this thing, and I'm guessing this was her intent, but it's really really cool because today we are sort of examining J. Marion Sims. We're looking at him and examining his mistakes and his problems and things like that. And we should do that with history. We shouldn't just gloss over things and unicorns and kittens and a cute dog in the foreground there. But I really really like this sort of answer to that. If you are interested, Michelle Browder, I think she is the owner of the building. I am not exactly sure, but down in Montgomery, a block or two away from the Capitol building, Sims's office, his office still stands, and she has some of this kind of imagery down there, and it's operating as a museum slash clinic, and that's really really cool. So we're gonna skip escape and recovery. We'll talk about that some more later. I actually want to get into that at a later date. So we'll just stop there, and we'll see you guys later.